Would you say this is a united front against China?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's at least a quarter of an inch deep. These people do not agree. The French, the Canadians, and the Americans are on one side. The Germans are not ready to put serious sanctions on the Chinese. Look, China is very important to Europe, and there is no consensus. There's no, even within the EU, what's to be done.
So, I mean, I'm guessing President Biden, one of his priorities was trying to reset relations after President Trump with NATO, with G7 nations as well. To what extent do you think he was successful on that front here? And what else needs to be done to have more of a united alliance against Beijing?
It was very successful. He has much better table manners. But this is geopolitics. When the United States got into Europe, it was after World War II. Europe was devastated. The Soviets are threatening. 1991 saw the Maastricht Treaty signed and the Soviet Union collapse. The entire basis of the European-American relationship has dissolved. A new one could be built, but the Europeans no longer depend on the Americans militarily, and the Americans really don't want to get involved in inter-European problems.
George, what's your take on the relations between the West and China? How far have relations deteriorated over the past 18 months or so?
Well, I think one of the remarkable things about Xi is how badly he's managed international relations. He's the largest exporter in the world, and all of the importing countries around him have hostile relations with him. It has gotten very serious for him on that level. And also militarily, his bluff has been called by the Americans, and NATO has kind of put a foot in the water here. So I think the situation there is much more aligned than it would appear to be, and also much more dangerous to the Chinese.
The thing is, George, how much can NATO do to rein in China's influence? If you take a look at the likes of Huawei, it's made inroads into infrastructure in Europe. You take a look at Costco, it's bought into a stake, in fact, a majority stake in a major port in Greece. So it begs the question, how much NATO can really do?
Well, the United States had this problem around the world. It had many assets, and the solution was nationalization. The nation took away those assets or redefined them or taxed them. Or when you have an investment in Europe, you are very vulnerable to European politics. And the Chinese weren't learning one of the lessons that the Americans learned. Having an asset doesn't mean you're going to be able to hold it. And that's the European option. They're not going to use it, and they're not going to use it soon, but it's there.
You wrote a note, George, recently about how NATO or Chinese competition could actually strengthen NATO. I was reading some headlines about how they're seeking a toughened response to new high-tech threats. How do you see that all playing out?
Well, nobody wants to see China expand as a military power. The United States is carrying the major burden very effectively in the South China Sea and with its allies from Australia to Japan. But at the same time, the Europeans have a major interest in China not expanding its power in that region or anywhere else. So it costs the Europeans very little to ante up on this problem, and also sends a message to the Chinese that they've about played their cards out on this round, and they better reconsider their moves.
Let's bring in Russia into the picture, George. I mean, how much alignment is there when it comes to interest between China and Russia, and how concerned should NATO be?
Well, from an economic point of view, there is Russian energy flowing into China, and that matters. From a military point of view, they can't support each other. Russia is a land power. It's facing westward into Europe. The Chinese are a sea power. So the Russians don't really have a military capability able to support the Chinese. And to add to that, the Chinese are not about to send large numbers of forces to the West. They can have an intelligence cooperation, they can have a technology cooperation, but in the end, a military alliance is going to be very hard to implement just because it doesn't work together.
So, George, what should we be looking out for in this Biden-Putin summit this week? Do you think a face-to-face meeting actually resolves anything, or could it actually make the relationship worse?
each side will say nice things at the end. They will go off. They will continue, the Russians will continue hacking the United States. The US will keep underwriting NGOs. This discussion going on here is a serious one between two major nation states. It's not a question of personality. It wasn't under Trump, isn't under Biden or Putin. They see each other as enemies, and they're very careful not to start a war. But the Americans are sitting in Poland and Romania, and the Russians are well aware of that.